is Michaela from Team Retro, where we like retro games, we like roguelikes, and we like the devices that bring them to us. Ever since starting this channel, I have joined quite a bit of communities on Reddit based on single board gaming and retro devices. And one of the communities that I'm a part of is the PiBoy subreddit. And this dock that I am currently unboxing comes from a user on that subreddit named MikeBrum86. He sells these on his Etsy store as well as through Reddit in order to not only have a dock for your PiBoy DMG, but he also sells backplates with vents. One of the biggest complaints about the PiBoy DMG is that it does not dissipate heat enough. So this user has set out to kind of fix that problem. So after talking to Mike Brum 86, I purchased a new backplate and a giant sized PiBoy dock from him. I spent about $130. He also sent an extra vent and he sent extra L and R buttons for the back. And once I told him that I had a YouTube channel and was going to make a video on this dock, he actually also sent me the smaller dock for review purposes. So we're going to continue this unboxing. Here you can actually see the backplate that he sent me with the updated vent and updated L and R buttons. We're also going to unbox the smaller dock and we're going to do some comparison tests. We're going to check the temperature before installing this backplate. I'll walk you through how to swap out the parts. And then we will test the PiBoy DMG both in and out of the dock to see how well this modification helps dissipate heat even when the processor is brought to its limit, testing high-end systems like Dreamcast and N64. We're going to cover a lot of ground in this video, and it is going to be a bit of a longer video, so settle in and let's get started. So one of the nice things about this dock are the spring-loaded clips that you can use to put the lid on and off. It'll keep it from opening unexpectedly. And there's also some vents on the side. The bigger dock actually has an HDMI port on the outside, and that runs to a mini HDMI port on the inside that you will actually connect to the PiBoy. Inside the dock, you have another vent, which actually lines up perfectly to where the vent was installed on the backplate. So if I put this in here and move it up close, you'll actually see that it lines up perfectly. So that should give the heat somewhere to go. The Experimental Pi logo is 3D printed into the vent, but if you don't like that, he does include another vent that does not have the logo. And he has openings in the dock for your port access, USB, and power. And when you are not using the device, you can actually seal up those ports to prevent dust from getting in there. So here's a little sliding door that I could just put right over the port, and you can actually use this dock for travel or as a carrying case if you wish. Now let's go ahead and unbox the smaller dock. Once we get this out here and opened up, you can see that it is very similar to the larger size dock. However, there are a few sacrifices with this size. You get the same doors to access your ports or to seal them up when the system is not in use, but you do not get an outside HDMI port. Instead, you have another small door where you can access the mini HDMI port on the side of the PiBoy itself, but you will need to supply your own cable. Similarly to the larger dock, when you put the PiBoy in, the vents on the dock line up with the custom vent on the backplate, and the air should dissipate right through. And there's your side port where you would put your HDMI cord. And here's your port access at the top. And at the bottom, you'll have access to your charge port and volume. The smaller port is definitely a lot more snug, but the Pi fits in there just fine, and the lid still has those same springs where you can seal it shut. So to test the effectiveness of this backplate and this dock, we're going to do some before tests to see how hot the PiBoy gets at stock. So here we are playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for the Dreamcast, and we're going to stick mostly with Dreamcast emulation for this video because I wanted to pick something that would actually stress out the CPU on the Raspberry Pi 4 that is enclosed in this DMG case. Just for a quick crash course on CPU temperatures, anything 65 degrees Celsius or below is healthy. You can theoretically overclock the temperature to about 75 degrees Celsius, but really once you start getting over 80, things start to get a little critical. Now, I did not overclock my PiBoy DMG. I wanted to give as close to an out-of-the-box experience as you will get, because if we can maintain healthy computer temperature throughout the testing in this video, then there is a lot of potential for overclocking this device with this modification. I personally don't see the need to overclock. I'm getting very healthy Dreamcast performance out of the PiBoy with stock settings, but you may be looking into this vent and this dock because you are interested in trying to push this Raspberry Pi 4 to the fullest extent. And right now, with no modifications to the PiBoy DMG, we are hitting about 60 degrees Celsius running Dreamcast on an easier to emulate game. So let's up the ante and let's try out Sonic Adventure 2. Here's Sonic Adventure 2 running on the Redream emulator, and we're still averaging about 60 degrees Celsius. Again, this is with no modifications to the device. I have not yet installed the backplate, but one thing I do want to make note is that temperature is still creeping upward, and the back of the PiBoy is getting a little warm. And that's just with using the PiBoy as a handheld. Let's actually try connecting this to a TV and seeing how that temperature gauge changes. Here we are playing Ikaruga while connected to my monitor. However, I'm still using the handheld controls of the PiBoy itself, so I am still holding the device, and some of that air can still escape out of the back of the unit. And we're still averaging temperatures of about 57 to 60 degrees Celsius, which is again a healthy temperature, but the temperature tends to creep upward and stay there, and the device still does get a little warm on the back. The highest overall temperature that I reached while playing Ikaruga this way was about 62 degrees Celsius. So let's try setting the stock PiBoy down on a flat surface and using a third-party controller. Here we are playing Virtua Fighter 3 TB, and we have the PiBoy set down on a flat surface with no dock, and we are using the third-party Elitist S controller, which I reviewed in one of my past videos. Now, I'm not saying you should lay your PiBoy flat on a surface like this while docked, but I wanted to simulate a potential way that somebody may use this device if they owned it, and you can see that temperature is creeping up. With the device flat on a surface like this, there's nowhere for the air to go, so that's going to continue to rise. So let's go ahead and swap out this back plate. I'm using the bag that came with the PiBoy just as a protective for the screen while we take the back plate off. Let's open up our battery cover, and my fingernails are not big enough, so I'm just going to use a plastic sponger just to kind of wedge that battery out. And just be very gentle unhooking the battery here. We're just going to pull it out by the port. And we have 6 screws on the back of the device that we need to unscrew in order to get this back plate off. Now just make sure you use the right size Phillips bit, as you don't want to strip these screws. I'm using a J0 size Phillips head. You will need to reuse these screws to put in the new back plate, so don't lose them. The back plate does come off easily. Just be careful of the power button on the top while you are taking the back plate off. It does like to come off very easily, and if it does come off, you will have to reseat it. It stayed in place for me, so I'm just gonna poke out these last couple of screws that stayed in the piece, and we're good to go. Let's go ahead and put the new back plate on. Just put it in place, same way as the last one was in. And just press tightly on it just to make sure that it's in place. I really do like that Pi logo on the vent, but these L&R buttons really aren't speaking to me. I can tell they were 3D printed, which is fine, but they lack that polish that the buttons that come from Experimental Pi have. So let's go ahead and put these screws back in. And our last step is to put the battery in. If you are unsure how the battery came out, just remember the red wire is the positive wire, and there is a plus and minus indicator on the battery cover itself. So the red wire will be towards the top of the device and the black wire towards the bottom. And here we go, we're all done. Now, once I turned this on, I noticed that the 3D printed R button was not working. The L button was working and clicking, but the R button was not. So I decided to take the back plate off again, and I'm going to swap those out. So swapping out the L and R buttons is very easy once you have the back plate off. All you have to do is take these 2 screws out and take the piece right off. And here's a closer look at the 3D printed L and R buttons. They do look like they may functionally be better, but I'm not a fan of the 3D printed look. That could be just a me problem, but also that R button was sticking, so I decided to put that aside. Now, Mike did also send with my purchase another set of L and R buttons that look a little bit more trigger-like, and these could potentially work better, but I'm still not a fan of the 3D printed look, so I'm just going to take the stock buttons from Experimental Pi and just put them on this modified backplate. Here's the stock backplate I was using. We're just going to unscrew those L and R buttons, and we're going to bring back the new plate, and it's very easy to put these back in place. Now that we have the L and R buttons in place the way I like them, we're going to test how this new vent works. Let's start in handheld mode with Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards. And for N64, these temperatures are actually very low. We're only averaging about 40 degrees Celsius, which is a very healthy temperature, and it's not getting warm at all. I think with this modification, if you don't overclock, anything N64 and lower, like Game Boy, should give you a pretty cool temp. So let's kick it up a notch and let's go back to Dreamcast emulation. And we're back up to about 59 to 60 degrees Celsius, which may look like there's not an improvement, but watch what happens the longer I play. Once we get out of the gameplay and back into the menus, that number is dropping drastically, and the system no longer feels warm like it did before. I'm going to let this run for a minute just so you could see that temperature gauge on the top left continue to decrease. This leads me to believe that we are getting much better airflow in handheld mode. And then once I exit back to the RetroPie menu, that number continues to just rapidly go down. It's kind of impressive. And again, let's get back to Ikaruga. At this point in my playtime, the temperature did go back up to 61 degrees Celsius, but watch as I continue to play, you're actually going to see the number go down back into the 50s, which is something that I did not experience with the stock backplate. Whereas before, the temperature of the system would raise and then stay there, now the temperature is raising and then cooling down pretty quickly. Now let's test out the bigger dock. Before we run the system, I just want to show you how the PiBoy fits in there. So let's go ahead and place it in the dock, and let's take out the door so we can access the ports. We'll go ahead and connect this mini HDMI cable. And then let's go ahead and put the lid on. I'm going to go ahead and lift this up here just so you can see the port access, and we'll put in our USB dongle for the controller. Another thing to note is that there's a little window on the end here where you can actually see the LED light of the PiBoy. And here's our charging port and volume. So let's go ahead and test this bad boy out. Sticking with Dreamcast for now, we're playing Mr. Driller, which is a surprisingly fun, if not challenging game. And we're getting the same results we got in handheld mode. The temperature kicks up to about 60 degrees Celsius and then starts going down into the 50s. The fact that we are seeing the temperature go down with every test indicates that the PiBoy is definitely cooling much more efficiently. But this is also in the dock, so we're not suffering any temperature performance even though we're in that box. So it seems like Mike has definitely made sure that heat can escape this dock. Let's take a look at the smaller dock now. You will need to supply your own mini HDMI to HDMI adapter if you get the smaller dock. I will include a link in the description below to one of those cables. So let's open this up, and you can see that it's a little bit more snug. Let's pull out the doors, and let's seat the system in here. Now the system is a little bit more snug, so I had to kind of finagle the PiBoy in there, but it did ultimately end up fitting. Let's put the lid back on. And let's plug in our mini HDMI adapter. Again, you have access to charging and volume, and you also have access to the Raspberry Pi's ports. So let's plug in our controller and let's test away. I don't know why I decided to torture myself with more Sonic Adventure 2. For some reason, the controls on the Dreamcast version are very wonky and clunky. I don't know if it's the Dreamcast version or the fact that we're emulating it, but I do not perform in this game nearly as well as I did when I played it on the GameCube. I feel like the GameCube version really touched up this game. Now, the temperature did not go down quite as quickly as with the bigger dock, but we did see a decline from 60 degrees Celsius to about 58 degrees Celsius, and it kind of held there while I was playing Sonic Adventure 2. So that might be because the dock is more snug than the bigger dock, but it doesn't cool down as much. However, it's still a definite improvement over laying the PiBoy down on a flat surface so he can't escape at all. Now, I did do one more test where I played God of War Chains of Olympus for the PSP. I played it at 1x resolution with a frame skip of 1, but the footage didn't save, and I unfortunately didn't have time to recapture the footage. But I will tell you that during my playtime, the temperature did increase to about 64 degrees Celsius, but then again immediately started rapidly cooling and probably stopped at about 58 degrees Celsius, and this was with the smaller dock. So we've been at this for about 24 minutes, which was a lot longer than I expected this video to be. So let's do some final thoughts. So who is this modification for? This is for anybody who wants to overclock their PiBoy DMG. It's also for anybody who wants to use this system very similarly to a Nintendo Switch. In other words, you want to play this in handheld mode, but sometimes you just want to connect it to the TV with an external controller and play it on a monitor. And you don't have to take the Raspberry Pi out of the case in order to do that. You can just plug it into one of these docks and you're off to the races. And while my impressions of this modified backplate and these docks were overwhelmingly positive, my one piece of constructive feedback would be on the printed replacement L&R buttons. I really wasn't a fan of how they looked, and they didn't work as well as I would have expected. However, it wasn't the end of the world, and this could very much just be a me problem. I'm actually very happy with the red L&R buttons that came from Experimental Pies, so I don't mind just having those on the modified backplate. One other thing that I might try to do with this system is try to find some type of sticker to cover up the broken up Experimental Pie logo that the new vent kind of covers up now. It does kind of look like an eyesore to me, but again, that's a me problem. I will figure out a way to cover that up, and it doesn't in any way, shape, or form make me any less happy with this purchase. And that'll do it for this video. I want to give a special thank you to Mike Brum86 for providing these units for sale. I can tell that this is a project with a lot of passion put into it, and it really is doing a service to the PiBoy community. I will leave a link to Mike's Etsy store if you are interested in purchasing this setup for your own PiBoy DMG. Thank you for watching this all the way to the end, and if this video was helpful to you in any way, please be sure to like and subscribe. We'll be doing a giveaway at 100 subscribers. Until the next one, bye for now, and don't stop believing.